He stood there, a black man in a sharp gray suit he'd saved for 7 months to afford. As the manager he reported to for 3 silent years tore the promotion letter in half, laughed, and tossed the pieces into the air like confetti in front of the entire executive floor. No explanation, no warning, just a performance, a public display of power and contempt, cloaked in corporate ritual, designed to humiliate. That moment, witnessed by those too comfortable to speak and too complicit to look away, marked the beginning of something they never expected. Because what they believed to be the end of a career was, in truth, the start of a reckoning. A quiet man, long overlooked, had recorded everything. Every lie, every theft, every time his skin made them assume he could be erased. And when the moment came, he didn't raise his voice. He let the truth burn through their system from the inside. This is not just a story of injustice. It's a slow, cold revolution built from silence, survival, and proof. If that opening gripped you, make sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment. What would you have done in that room? And where are you watching from? I want to hear your take. This series goes deeper than revenge. It's about power reclaimed without permission. Keep watching. It only gets louder. Everett Miles stepped off the city bus at 5:56 a.m. The sky was still a murky gray, and dew clung to the sidewalks like condensation inside a glass. His shoes clicked on the concrete with muted confidence, and his shoulders squared beneath the weight of what today could mean. Wrapped carefully in a plastic garment cover for most of the commute, the suit he wore now was the finest thing he owned. Not flashy, but clean. Charcoal wool, tailored slightly at the waist, a subtle pinstripe that danced under sunlight if the angle hit just right. He had bought it after 6 months of saving, weeks of window shopping, and a 3-hour tailoring appointment that ended with a receipt that made his stomach knot for a week. But it was worth it. Today, he'd heard, was his chance to step forward. The whispers had come soft, passed along by Rachel in strategy and Brent from M&A. Everett was going to be invited into the room for Lexington Capital's biggest merger of the fiscal year. Not to speak, not yet, but to be there, to be seen. He walked into the gleaming lobby, nodded at the early security staff, and pressed the elevator button to floor 34. As the numbers ticked upward, he exhaled and adjusted his cuffs. This was it. He belonged here. He had earned it. The elevator doors opened to soft lights, muted voices, and the gentle rustle of high-priced fabric. The executive floor had its own quiet rhythm, like an unspoken hum reserved for people who already knew the rules. Everett stepped forward, carrying that suit-like armor, ready to step into the cadence. Chadwick Grazer stood at the far end of the corridor outside the glass conference room, surrounded by analysts and junior execs who clung to his every word. Chadwick always looked as if the world were beneath him, his hair styled with surgical precision, his expression sharp and amused, like everything around him was a punchline waiting to be delivered. As Everett approached, Chadwick's voice rose, slicing through the hallway with practiced timing. "Gentlemen," he called, "looks like Miles took my advice. Dressed up for the job he'll never get." Laughter followed. A few chuckled softly, others glanced away. Everett smiled, thin and controlled. He kept walking. Chadwick wasn't finished. "Careful with that sleeve, Miles. Looks like you ironed it under a stack of bricks." More laughter, louder this time. One of the interns laughed too hard and choked on his coffee. Everett's throat tightened. The suit he had bought, the suit he thought would signal his arrival, was now reduced to a hallway joke. He said nothing, just nodded politely as he passed, heading for the seat furthest from the head of the table. When the meeting began, no one acknowledged him. Not a glance, not a welcome. The agenda rolled out, projections, risk models, timelines. Numbers and names he knew better than anyone at that table. When a mistake flickered across the presentation screen, Everett opened his mouth to interject, but Chadwick talked over him before a full word escaped. The moment passed. Another voice carried. The meeting ended without him ever speaking. Afterward, he waited as the others dispersed, seizing his chance to speak with Chadwick. "Sir," he began, keeping his voice low and respectful, "I heard I'd be shadowing the Midway consolidation team today. Chadwick didn't look up from his tablet. "You heard wrong." Everett hesitated. "Rachel mentioned." Rachel was mistaken. Chadwick's voice was flat. "You're on file prep. Asset tracing. Rooms full upstairs." He turned and walked off. Everett stood still. His mouth opened, then closed. No one looked at him. He returned to his desk on the East Wing, only to find a note taped to his monitor. "Reassigned annex." That word, annex, meant nothing to most. But Everett had been here long enough to know. The annex wasn't a department. It was a place where careers went to wait. He followed the hallways to the print room, past the unused mail carts, into a windowless offshoot that buzzed with fluorescent heat and smelled like paper glue. His new desk was wedged between filing cabinets and an unplugged shredder. His chair had no wheels. A vent above him ticked irregularly like a bad clock. There was no computer, just a stack of records and a pen. For the next 4 hours, Everett combed through asset sheets that hadn't been touched since 2012. Redundant portfolios, expired insurance documents, service contracts from defunct subsidiaries. By noon, his hands were dry with dust. At 1:17 p.m., a staff email popped on his company phone. "Merger celebration catered lunch. Conference room B." He didn't go. Since his reassignment to the annex, the firm had gone out of its way to remind him how invisible he was. It didn't start with a memo or a meeting. It began with the silence. The long, sustained silence of being erased while still being present. Each morning, his badge beeped without greeting. Each elevator ride was quieter than the last, faces turning slightly, pretending they didn't see him. And each time he reached that cold, windowless alcove, it felt less like an office and more like a warning. That day, as he walked past the East Wing, his old hallway, he noticed the framed art had changed. The photos of global offices, once evenly spaced and updated quarterly, now featured a group shot from the merger celebration. There was Rachel, smiling as she accepted an award for innovation. Brent, standing beside a screen that displayed Everett's metrics. Chadwick, front and center, arm raised like a conductor who'd orchestrated the entire deal alone. Everett kept walking. He passed the break room. Laughter erupted from inside. He didn't look in. He'd learned quickly what it meant to be at the bottom of a company while pretending you weren't. When he reached the annex, the smell hit first. Musty, metallic, and sharp. Something had changed. The vent above his desk was dripping, slow, rhythmic taps that hit the top of his cabinet and echoed through the space. A single bucket had been placed beneath it, half full of brownish water. Beside his desk, 2 towering stacks of unopened supply crates had appeared overnight. Cardboard leaned at awkward angles, the tops warped from pressure, labels written in black marker so faded they were unreadable. There was no note, no warning, and no explanation. He stepped carefully around them and sat at his desk, only to realize the floor beneath him was damp. The pipe from the ceiling had spread its stain across the tile. His shoes would be soaked before noon. Still, he powered on his terminal and resumed the spreadsheet from the day before. Legacy contract evaluations for a subsidiary that hadn't been active since 2017. When he clicked into the folder, access was denied. He tried another document. Same result. Everything was read-only now. He sent a help request to IT. No one responded. At 11, Everett walked to the East printer room to collect a batch of merger documentation he had tagged for printing the night before. The documents weren't there. A senior analyst, named Nolan from Chadwick's team, was standing by the copier, rifling through a thick set of papers that looked all too familiar. Everett approached, calm, measured. Nolan looked up with a smirk and handed him a page. "Lost something, Miles?" Everett read the first line and recognized his own notes, formatting, font style, even the footer template he had created. "I queued these last night," he said evenly. Nolan shrugged. "Then maybe you should get here earlier." Everett didn't reply. He returned to his desk and found a folded note left on his keyboard. On it, scribbled in block letters, "Please avoid East Side printers. Dedicated to authorized departments only." No name, no signature, just ink, paper, and implication. That afternoon, HR sent out a building-wide memo introducing a new initiative, workspace optimization. The firm, they said, was re-evaluating seating to maximize productivity. A chart was attached. Names were listed by division. Everett's name was not on it. The annex wasn't mentioned at all. He replied to the message, asking if this meant his relocation was temporary or permanent. An hour later, he received a one-line response from an assistant he didn't recognize. No further movement is scheduled at this time. He read the sentence twice, then stared at the blinking cursor. No further movement. Not even the illusion of progress. At 3:30, a staff meeting occurred 2 floors up, open to all involved in the merger process. Everett had received no calendar invite, but he went anyway. He stood at the edge of the conference room, leaning against the wall like an extra in a scene he wasn't written into. No one acknowledged him. Chadwick spoke for 30 minutes about synergy and vertical integration, referencing numbers Everett knew he had calculated. Chadwick's final slide credited the analysis to Brent and Nolan. No mention of Everett's name. When the meeting ended, Everett remained still. Chadwick passed him in the hallway, glanced down at Everett's shoes, soaked from the leak, and grinned. "You should request boots, Miles. Might be more appropriate for your current climate." He didn't wait for a response. That night, Everett didn't leave at 5. He stayed late, past 6, past 7, even after the lights in the east wing flickered off. In the silence of the annex, with only the drip of water and the low thrum of the building's power system for company, he opened his own backup files. On a portable drive he had never used on company machines, he reviewed his original projections, his work logs, the slides he had built, the graphs that had formed the backbone of a deal he was now erased from. He stared at the data not to relive his exclusion, but to remind himself he wasn't imagining it. He had done the work. The numbers had lived in his hands. What they had taken from him wasn't confusion or disappointment. It was visibility. They had pulled a curtain over his name and replaced it with theirs. He left at 8:42 p.m. The night was cold. His shoes made sloshing sounds on the wet pavement. The wind scraped against his collar. He took the long route home, not because he enjoyed the city streets, but because his apartment felt too small, too silent, and too real. At home, he hung his jacket carefully on the hook by the door and placed his shoes on the mat, darkened by water and time. He sat at the kitchen table, unmoving, until midnight. The elevator hummed on its way up, and when it reached the floor where the annex was hidden away, Everett stepped into a hallway that now felt less like a part of the company and more like a waiting room for the discarded. The water stain on the ceiling had widened. The crates stacked around his desk now pressed closer, leaning like spectators, silent and oppressive. The chair he had used yesterday was missing a wheel entirely now, and when he sat, it dipped heavily to one side. He didn't flinch. He powered on the sluggish desktop terminal and opened the only project folder he had consistent access to, a maintenance-level review of inactive contracts filed under an outdated client code. It had no strategic value, no attention from executives, and no possibility of impact. Yet Everett worked through it as if it mattered, not because he believed it did, but because he refused to hand them evidence that he had stopped trying. A little before 10 o'clock, a department-wide email appeared in his inbox with a subject line that read, "Q3 Client Success Celebration All Hands Meeting." The body of the message included a list of attendees and an attachment titled Recognition Notes. Everett opened it and scanned the PDF quickly, his eyes moving down the page with growing tension. The name of the client, Markham Terra Holdings, appeared under the bolded heading, Strategic Growth Partnership Outstanding Leadership. The description praised the successful management of the 18-month client relationship, the turnaround in asset recovery, and the preparation of pre-merger logistics. Below that, a name appeared in bold italics, not Everett's. Instead, it read, Lead Strategist, Justin Callahan, Intern Cohort 2025. For a moment, Everett couldn't breathe. The project had been his from day one. He had mapped the integration steps, conducted the early due diligence, rewritten the compliance language, and worked weekends fine-tuning the layered subsidiary models for a clean acquisition. Justin Callahan had only joined the team 3 months ago. The intern had shadowed Everett silently, occasionally asking questions, usually taking notes, and only recently had been granted read-only access to the internal files Everett had created. Now the intern was being publicly credited with the success of a deal that had consumed nearly 2 years of Everett's life. A second wave of nausea struck as he read the agenda attached to the meeting invite. There would be refreshments, speeches, a photo session, formal certificates, all for a project Everett had crafted from start to finish. He closed the file slowly, sat back in his broken chair, and allowed himself precisely 7 seconds of stillness. Then, without emotion, he stood, adjusted his collar, and walked toward the executive conference room. When he entered, the room was already buzzing. People were laughing, arranging seats, organizing note cards. Chadwick stood at the front, sleeves rolled just slightly to give the illusion of approachability. On the screen behind him, a slideshow ran images of the project's major milestones. Everett saw one of his own Excel models flash by, complete with the color-coded tiering system he had designed, before fading into a transition screen titled, Teamwork and Action Leadership in Motion. Chadwick began speaking, voice raised enough to command the room, but still casual, almost amused. He thanked the department for their efforts, spoke of resilience, of creativity, and then turned toward Justin Callahan, calling him to the front with a wave. The intern stepped forward, flushed with pride, clutching a folder and glancing back at the audience with a boyish grin. Chadwick clapped a hand on his shoulder and announced that Justin's contribution had revived a legacy partnership and helped us set a new standard for integration readiness. There was applause. Photos were taken. Someone handed Justin a certificate framed in silver. Chadwick made a joke about promoting him early. The crowd laughed. Everett watched from the back of the room. No one noticed he was there. No one looked in his direction. When the speeches ended and the crowd dispersed toward the catered table, Everett moved silently toward the display board where the framed certificate had been placed on an easel for viewing. At the bottom of the printed summary, in small italic text, a line read, Original groundwork attributed to former team contributors. Former. The word rang louder than everything else in the room. Later that afternoon, Everett returned to the annex, sat down at his desk, and opened his personal notebook. He wrote the date at the top of the page. Then he began listing every document he had written for the Markham Terror Project, every model, every meeting, every slide. He did not write from bitterness. He wrote from memory, preserving the truth not for proof, but for clarity. He needed to remember the full extent of what had been taken. At 3:07 p.m., Chadwick's voice rang down the hallway, echoing through the vents. He was giving a tour to visiting executives. When noon arrived, an automated reminder flashed on Everett's terminal, alerting him of the quarterly culture mixer, hosted in the main lounge, mandatory attendance for all full-time staff. He stared at the message, considered ignoring it, but something about the word mandatory forced his feet into motion. He had long since learned that when someone at Lexington said attendance was optional, absence was forgotten. But when they said it was mandatory, absence became a mark. When he arrived, the lounge had already been transformed into something garishly celebratory. Gold and navy streamers hung above folding tables lined with drink dispensers and branded napkins. Music pulsed low through overhead speakers. A small speaker system buzzed with anticipation, a microphone sitting unused on a table beside several neatly stacked boxes. Most of the department had gathered near the back, talking in groups, holding drinks and snacks. Chadwick stood near the center of it all, wearing a blazer without a tie, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest relaxation, eyes scanning the room with the calm of someone who controlled its every detail. When he saw Everett, his smile widened, the corners of his mouth twitching with delight that had nothing to do with hospitality. "There he is," Chadwick said loudly, clapping his hands. "We were wondering if you'd make it. Got a little something for you." Everett stopped mid-step. All heads turned toward him. Chadwick walked to one of the boxes and pulled out a folded apron, Lexington branded, white with navy trim, and held it up with both hands. "We're a team here, Miles," Chadwick said. his voice playful but commanding. Everyone contributes. Today, we're rotating drink duty. Yours starts now. There was a pause, a silence filled with half-suppressed laughter. Then someone whispered something Everett couldn't hear, followed by a sharp snicker. Chadwick stepped forward and handed the apron to Everett. "Come on," he said, tilting his head. "I hear this fits better than your usual wardrobe." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone near the back muttered, "Cat walks that way." Everett's jaw clenched. His fingers curled slightly around the fabric. He thought, for a brief second, of refusing, of throwing it on the floor, of walking out. But he knew better. The rules here were never written, but the punishments were always real. If he resisted, it would be insubordination. If he left, it would be abandonment. If he spoke up, it would be aggression. So he nodded once, put on the apron, and walked to the drink table. The cloth hung awkwardly from his neck, thin and crinkled, tied loosely around his waist. It didn't fit. It was too long, dragging slightly against his knees, too wide, swallowing the clean lines of his shirt and trousers. The Lexington logo stretched across his chest like a warning. For the next 40 minutes, he poured drinks. Iced tea, punch, sparkling water. Plastic cups lined the table in rows, and each time someone approached, they offered a joke, a smirk, or a comment that pretended to be harmless. "Look at this guy," one executive said. "Always thought he was overqualified for finance." "You thinking of switching to hospitality?" someone else quipped. "Or is this part of the new annex rotation?" Even Justin Callahan approached, drink already in hand, and stood across the table with a sheepish grin. "Thanks again for showing me the models," he said. "They're teaching me a lot." Everett didn't answer. He poured another drink. Justin left. The mixer continued. Pictures were taken. Chadwick posed for several, always gesturing toward the drink station with a grin, once pretending to give Everett a tip. The photographer laughed. Everett stood still, his hand steady, his face blank. His mind, however, was tracking everything, every expression, every glance, every small cruelty dressed up as fun. At one point, Chadwick leaned over and whispered, "Bet you never thought you'd get to wear a uniform that matched your output." Then he winked and walked away. The comment didn't sting. Not anymore. It confirmed what Everett had already accepted. There was no floor to their contempt. The apron was not a joke. It was a stage. A deliberate act designed to transform him into something lesser, to bind him visually to a place he did not belong. As the mixer drew to a close, the tables began to empty. People filtered out slowly, patting one another on the back, complimenting Chadwick on the event, nodding with the satisfied calm of those who had gotten their fill. Everett removed the apron and folded it once precisely, before placing it back on the table. He did not look around the room. He walked out. Back in the annex, the air was thicker than usual. The vent above his desk had stopped ticking, but the silence felt worse. He sat down slowly and opened his notebook again. He added a new section, dated and labeled clearly. Stage 4, he wrote. Public reassignment ritual. Then he described everything in detail. The moment the apron was handed to him, the words used, the expression on Chadwick's face, the laughter, the glances, the exact phrases spoken by colleagues. He wrote without emotion, only fact, clear, controlled, documented. At the bottom of the page, he drew a thin line, then underlined a single sentence. They need this more than I do. That night, he didn't go straight home. He walked 3 extra blocks past his train stop to a small, quiet bookstore he had visited years ago. Inside, he found the business section and purchased 3 used books on corporate governance, strategic ownership, and shareholder rights. Every internal transfer that buried him deeper into corporate invisibility. His notebook grew heavier. His private file cache, discreetly stored and encrypted on his own hardware, expanded to include emails, photographs, copies of original documents with timestamps that matched submission records. He didn't plan on revenge. Not then. But he knew power didn't rise in one motion. It collected over time, quietly, until it was ready to be named. The annex had become more than a workplace. It was now a staging ground, a vault, an archive of suppression no one else had the patience to maintain. That morning began like any other, cold and dim and uneventful. The ceiling vent above Everett's desk still didn't work. The light still flickered. The damp tiles beneath his chair remained stained from months of dripping. Nothing changed until exactly 9:04 a.m. when an email from executive support appeared in his inbox. Meeting request. Conference room 16F 10 a.m. Attendees: E. Miles, C. Grazer, S. Lindstrom Legal, J. Halbert HR, B. Young Strategic Affairs. Subject: Personal Review. It was the first time his name had appeared in a meeting with executives in over a year. He stared at it for a long time before accepting. There was no reason given, no agenda, just a location and a time. At 9:58, Everett rose from his desk. He smoothed his shirt, adjusted the cuffs of a jacket he hadn't worn since the Markham Terra debacle, and walked calmly through the building. The hallways felt unusually still, as if something were being staged again, but on a different level. When he arrived outside conference room 16F, the frosted glass panel was closed. The door opened precisely at 10 o'clock. Inside sat Chadwick Grazer at the head of the table, his posture loose, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. To his left sat Sylvia Lindstrom from Legal, reviewing a printed packet. To the right was Jared Halbert, the new HR lead, his tie slightly askew. At the far end of the table, Bernard Young scrolled lazily through something on his tablet, uninterested in formalities. Everett stepped inside. No one gestured toward a seat. He chose the only one empty, across from Chadwick, directly in the line of sight. Chadwick looked up with a smile that wasn't friendly. "Thanks for joining us, Miles. We've been reviewing internal development progress, and your name came up. You've been here a while. Long tenure, consistent file activity, predictable metrics. But one thing's been missing." Chadwick leaned back, reaching into a folder. "Initiative, above and beyond." He pulled out a crisp envelope and held it up between two fingers. It bore Everett's name in elegant print, embossed with the Lexington seal. For a moment, Everett allowed a flicker of confusion. He didn't speak. Chadwick smiled. "Some people," he continued, "believe this should be delivered to you last quarter." He turned the envelope slowly, like he was presenting an award. "But personally, I wasn't convinced." Without further prelude, Chadwick opened the envelope, withdrew a single sheet of fine parchment paper, and held it up. Then, without reading it, he tore it in half. Then again, until the pieces fluttered down like snow. The sound was deliberate, surgical, meant to be heard. The room remained silent, except for the faint rustle of shredded paper falling onto the polished table. Chadwick leaned forward. "We've decided not to move forward with the advancement consideration. Culturally, we feel your alignment with the company's vision has plateaued." From across the table, Sylvia Lindstrom added, "This conversation is being documented as a formal HR interaction, with full transparency. Any questions you have can be directed to us in writing." Jared Halbert offered a short, unreadable shrug, then turned back to his notes. Bernard Young didn't look up. Then Chadwick reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. He placed it carefully on the table in front of Everett, pressing it down with two fingers. Written in thick black marker across the front was one word: denied. The napkin was folded like a letter. Chadwick smirked. "In case you want a keepsake." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was constructed, designed to corner, to provoke, to watch a reaction unfold that could be turned into evidence. But Everett didn't give them anything. He didn't twitch. He didn't reach for the napkin. He didn't move. He simply stood, adjusted his coat, and nodded once. "Understood," he said. Then he turned and walked out. He heard the faint sound of laughter as the door closed behind him, soft at first, then louder, followed by Chadwick's voice saying something he couldn't quite make out, likely a joke at his expense. As he walked down the hallway, Everett could feel bits of the shredded promotion letter still clinging to the back of his shoulders. A sliver of parchment caught in his collar, another stuck to the fabric of his sleeve. He didn't brush them off. He left them there. Proof. When he reached the annex, he didn't sit down. Instead, he opened the supply closet beside the file shelves and removed a box he had prepared weeks ago, sealed, unmarked, resting beneath a sheet of copier paper. Inside was a series of duplicates, everything from the last 2 years, dated, tagged, stored. He carried the box back to his desk and opened a fresh document on his terminal. Title: Performance Termination Ritual Internal Denial Process. He described the entire meeting in cold detail. The names, the words, the gestures, the sequence, the envelope, the napkin, the confetti. Each line was recorded precisely. He included timestamps from his calendar, audio notations from memory, and a note to check for surveillance camera coverage of conference room 16F. When he finished, he attached the new entry to his growing master log, now labeled as version 12. He saved the file in 3 separate locations, 1 physical, 2 digital, all secure. Then, for the first time in months, Everett left the building before sunset. He walked until his legs ached through streets filled with evening light, surrounded by noise and motion that made no demand of him. He stopped at a corner cafe, ordered coffee, and sat outside, letting the paper flakes still stuck to his coat drift away in the breeze. He sipped slowly, breathing deep, no longer asking what might happen next, only deciding what he would make of it. Password expiration was common. He tried again, then again. Each time the message read, "User not recognized." He attempted to access his cloud folder. Denied. The internal chat system. Denied. When he opened his email browser, the response was worse than denial. It no longer existed. His address returned an error. Recipient not found. Everett stood slowly, his breath fogging slightly in the cold air, and stepped out of the annex. He walked to the east wing, ignoring the stares from junior staff clustered near the espresso machine. The glass door to human resources required badge access. He swiped his card. Nothing. A red light blinked. He tried again. Red. Denied. He stepped back, checked the card for damage, then tried the hallway restroom door. Red. The system didn't recognize his identity. He made his way to the cafeteria, located on floor 15, still functioning with open seating and biometric entry for employees. When he placed his thumb on the scanner, the screen flashed yellow, then white, then displayed a short line of text: "Access not permitted." He stepped aside, watched as the employee behind him scanned her badge without issue, and entered. Everett didn't follow. He turned and walked back toward the administrative offices. Inside, he found the receptionist for corporate records, a woman he'd spoken to once before about a misplaced box of archive contracts. She looked up as he approached, then frowned slightly. "Can I help you?" she asked. Everett nodded. "My access credentials aren't working. I think there's been a system update. I've been locked out." She tapped her keyboard, typed his name into the system, paused, then looked back at him. Her eyebrows rose, but her expression didn't change. "There's no profile listed under Everett Miles. Employee ID 8489, he added calmly. She typed again. "That ID isn't active. Can you escalate it?" he asked. She hesitated. "I'll flag it. You should follow up with your direct manager." He thanked her and turned away, already knowing what that meant. When he reached the strategy corridor, Chadwick was seated in his glass-walled office, feet up, talking casually to 2 visiting clients. Everett waited by the doorway, hands at his sides, until Chadwick noticed him. He smiled and excused himself from the conversation, stepping outside with an expression of exaggerated surprise. "Miles," he said, laughing. "Didn't think you were still here." Everett didn't respond. Chadwick tilted his head. "You've been off the grid. Thought you packed up after the mixer. That, or the HR memo got lost." Everett's silence remained. "If your badge doesn't work," Chadwick continued, "probably means the system thinks you're gone. Ghost in the machine." He laughed and walked back into his office. The door closed. The clients inside didn't ask who Everett was. They didn't look. They had already forgotten him. Back in the annex, Everett sat again in the darkness. His terminal refused access. His phone no longer received internal messages. The cafeteria, the restroom, the elevators past the 20th floor, all offline for him. He was still physically present in the building, but digitally erased. Not fired, not formally terminated, just removed. No paper trail, no documentation, just gone. He checked the internal staff directory using a public access console. No Everett Miles, no job title, no department, as if he had never existed. That evening, the cleaning crew arrived earlier than usual. They stopped outside the annex, glanced in, and spoke quietly. Everett overheard one of them ask whether the space was being cleared. The other replied that it wasn't assigned anymore. One cleaner peeked in and asked if the boxes needed to be moved. Everett answered firmly, "Not yet." They left him alone. He sat in silence for several minutes before standing and opening his backup laptop, one that had never been connected to the company network. He opened a spreadsheet labeled Stage 6. He began typing. Today, identity removal confirmed. No warning, no paper, no HR protocol. Executed via badge deactivation, email erasure, directory purge, system lockout. Implication, unofficial offboarding. He paused, then added, response from supervisor. Open denial and dismissal masked as humor. Public status, undefined. Private status, invisible. He listed the locations where access had been denied. He time-stamped his badge scans. He described the look on Chadwick's face, relaxed, condescending, victorious. He added the cleaner's question to the log. At the bottom of the page, he typed one final line, erased, not eliminated. He saved the file and backed it up to a drive hidden inside one of the filing cabinets, marked only by a code he had memorized. The next morning, Everett arrived even earlier. The building was still dark. No one was on the executive floors. He used the service entrance. The security guard didn't glance up from his phone. Everett moved past the lobby and took the stairs to the annex. When he arrived, he found a stack of documents resting outside the doorway. Unsigned printouts of merger summaries, all bearing the wrong author name. He brought them inside and laid them on his desk. At the top of the first page, someone had scrawled in red pen, property of Brent Ashby. Brent had not worked on the merger. Everett had. The handwriting was unfamiliar, likely someone junior, someone who didn't know the history. The board of Lexington Capital was scheduled to meet that morning for its quarterly review session, a private gathering of senior executives, legal observers, external financial auditors, and select partners flown in from multiple cities. It would be held in the upper conference level, floor 39, a space Everett no longer had digital access to, but one he knew intimately from years of silent preparation. Long ago, when he had worked in strategy and supported quarterly consolidations, he had memorized the guest list cadence, the arrival schedules, and most importantly, the mechanical override process for service access. That morning, at precisely 9:03 a.m., Everett used a side corridor to reach the freight elevator, swiped a pass that had not yet been deactivated from a printer technician's cart, and took the lift to floor 38. From there, he used the fire escape stairwell to access floor 39 before the hallway cameras activated for scheduled recording. He wore no badge. He carried no portfolio. In his right hand was a single USB drive encased in matte steel. In his left, his personal copy of the original merger projections, handwritten annotations, time-stamped development logs, and attribution overlays designed to identify alterations. The room he entered was already in session. A long polished table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by men and women in tailored suits, each with open laptops, printed binders, and half-empty cups of conference coffee. At the head of the table sat Lexington's CEO, Charles Winfield, flanked by senior partners and general counsel. Chadwick Grazer was seated 4 chairs down, gesturing toward a slide projected on the wall that boasted a 23% efficiency increase in post-merger operations. Everett stepped inside quietly. The doors clicked behind him. No one noticed at first. The presentation continued. Charts shifted. A junior associate read revenue forecasts. Then, one by one, heads began to turn, first toward the sound of his footsteps, then toward his face. Confusion flickered. Surprise. A hint of discomfort. Chadwick turned next. His face froze, his mouth slightly open, his eyes locked on Everett as if seeing a ghost. Everett said nothing. He walked to the far end of the table, placed the USB drive precisely in the center, and set his annotated folder beside it. He didn't sit. He didn't look at Chadwick. Instead, he spoke clearly, his voice calm and firm, cutting through the ambient buzz of confusion. The numbers on slide 6 are based on analysis stolen from a private development log. The performance metrics shown have been inflated, the credit falsified, and the documentation submitted to compliance was altered to exclude the originator. A silence spread through the room. Everett continued. The USB contains copies of the original work. The folder has physical annotations and comparative timestamps. I suggest you verify both before submitting the final version to shareholders or regulators. He paused, let the word settle, then added one more line. You have a choice. Verify what I'm telling you or ignore it and risk a regulatory disaster. Then he turned and walked toward the door. No further explanation. No plea. No dramatics. He left the room in silence, leaving behind evidence so meticulously prepared it needed no defense. The boardroom did not erupt. It froze. Everett didn't look back. He returned to the annex, walking the same path he always had, passing the same indifferent offices, ignored by the same executives who now sat in a room holding the proof of their complicity. He sat at his desk, opened his backup laptop, and created a new file. Stage 7 First Reveal. He typed with precision, describing the entry, the reaction, the names at the table, the sequence of silence, and the impact of truth delivered without force. He wrote, "Message was not received with resistance. It was received with fear." The entry ended with one line, "They cannot unsee it." Later that day, security was dispatched to review the meeting room activity. The official reason given was data integrity concern. Unofficially, the board had been shaken. A call was placed to compliance. A second call followed to legal affairs. Chadwick did not return to his office that afternoon. A courier was seen retrieving files from his desk. No announcements were made, but whispers began. Not loud, not public, quiet, careful, enough to stir doubt, enough to trigger review. Everett watched from the margins, silent and still. He made no statements. He submitted no reports. But his evidence had entered the bloodstream of the firm, and no amount of denial could remove it. By Thursday, the file he had submitted was under legal review. Internal systems flagged a set of documents previously approved by Chadwick's department. The timeline inconsistencies matched the projections Everett had kept for months. A compliance manager requested additional materials. Everett sent them through a secured channel, unsigned, with metadata preserved. He said nothing more. He walked the halls the same way he had before, unacknowledged, unnamed, but no longer unnoticed. Some employees glanced his way longer than usual. A few avoided him entirely. One intern, new, young, unaware, asked aloud if he worked in oversight. No one answered. By Friday, a formal internal audit had been launched. It was described as routine. It wasn't. The legal team, unable to suppress what had been seen, initiated an integrity review under the guise of routine oversight. But nothing about it was routine. Compliance was ordered to re-audit documentation related to 5 mergers. Chadwick's name appeared on 4 of them. Brent Ashby's on 3. Justin Callahan, the intern whose name had replaced Everett's, was quietly removed from several high-visibility projects. No formal reprimand was issued, just reassignment, away from strategy, out of sight. Chadwick, however, remained untouched publicly, still wearing his tailored suits, still speaking in carefully timed statements. But he no longer passed Everett in the hallway. In fact, he no longer crossed paths with him at all. Whether by design or avoidance, Chadwick had become less visible, trading center stage presence for closed-door meetings and unscheduled absences. Still, Everett made no declarations. He didn't post messages or file complaints. He didn't ask for reinstatement. Instead, he prepared the next step. The email from legal arrived midweek. Not from a known contact, but from a mid-tier associate, phrased with casual politeness and strategic vagueness. Hi Everett. Hoping to touch base regarding some historical work you may have participated in surrounding asset evaluation. We'd appreciate a brief meeting if you're available this week to clarify timelines. The subtext was loud. They wanted to know what else he had. Everett didn't respond. He let the message sit. The next day, a second message came from HR. Same tone, different language. We noticed some inconsistencies in department assignments connected to legacy project files. We'd like to ensure everything is in alignment with current roles. Can we schedule a check-in? Still, Everett said nothing. He continued working from the annex, still without a formal badge, still denied access to internal platforms, still excluded from the staff index. But now, the erasure no longer felt like exile. It felt like insulation, protection from interference, clarity for preparation. He spent hours assembling a single file. Not a legal brief, not an exposé, a timeline, a cross-reference document connecting 6 strategic projects completed over the past 2 fiscal years. Each one had followed the same pattern. Preliminary modeling by Everett, review processes rerouted through Chadwick's division, final presentation reassigned to another name, followed by upward credit migration. Each case was backed by matching metadata, original draft versions with invisible author tags, meeting records, timestamps, version control logs. The patterns were unmistakable. The last page of the document contained only 4 elements: a high-resolution scan of his original employee's signature, the unaltered header from his Markham Terra model, a photo of the torn promotion letter pieces retrieved from the annex floor, and his name in bold black font, Everett Elijah Miles. The document totaled 93 pages. He printed 3 copies, bound them in matte black folders. No cover titles, no page numbers. That Friday morning, the quarterly strategic committee review was scheduled to begin at 8:30 a.m. in the North Pavilion Conference Hall. It was a formal event. Attendance required executive clearance. The room had a guest list. Everett was not on it, but he knew that the reception staff would not deny entry to someone who walked in with confidence and carried 3 identical binders. He dressed in black, no tie, no branding, no name tag. He walked through the building with the calm of someone returning something that had been misplaced. When he reached the hall, the receptionist at the door glanced up, ready to speak, but Everett kept walking. Not fast, not hesitant, deliberate, controlled. The moment passed before she could interrupt. Inside, the committee had already begun small talk. Chadwick was seated near the front, flanked by his deputy and 2 board liaisons. As Everett entered, a hush rippled through the room, the kind of hush that followed recognition without understanding. He walked to the presentation table, placed the 3 folders gently onto the surface, opened the top one to reveal the contents, then stepped back without a word. One of the liaison staff leaned forward. A senior partner flipped through the first few pages. Chadwick's face turned from bemused to still. His hands folded slowly. Everett did not speak. He didn't explain. He didn't point. He didn't wait. He turned and left the room the same way he entered, not looking back, not rushing, not reacting. Outside the hall, he walked down the corridor past staff who pretended not to see him, but whose faces betrayed sudden alertness. He stepped into the stairwell, descended 3 flights, and returned to the annex. There, he documented everything. He titled the new file Stage 8 Name Reclaimed. He wrote the following: Entry unchallenged. Presence accepted by silence. Evidence delivered. Verification unavoidable. Final page confirms authorship and ownership. Result: forced recognition through undeniable history. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and closed his notebook. That afternoon, whispers escalated to calls. One board liaison contacted compliance. Another messaged legal. The file had triggered something deeper, because it not only revealed misconduct, it connected it. A pattern, a deliberate system of extraction and misattribution, a method. And Everett's name was not just a footnote now. It was the title. Internal channels began compiling their own investigations. Quiet phone calls were made to external counsel. The CEO was copied on a private thread titled Urgent. Attribution audit implications for shareholder disclosure. Chadwick was summoned to a closed-door session. He remained inside for over 90 minutes. When he emerged, he no longer wore his jacket. His expression was not anger. Legal reviewed the timestamps and digital signatures and found what Everett had always known they would find: evidence of falsification, document overwrites, credit reassignment, and digital trails leading back not to isolated missteps, but to a coordinated effort that redirected recognition upward while burying true authorship beneath silence. The pattern, once exposed, proved impossible to contain. It spread outward into external audit protocols. The Financial Governance Review Board, upon receiving a confidential alert from Lexington's own oversight liaison, began a quiet investigation. For 72 hours, no one inside the company spoke openly. Meeting calendars emptied. Executives canceled travel. Chadwick Grazer, for the first time in his tenure, arrived late to work and left early, passing silently through corridors he used to dominate. He no longer laughed in doorways. He no longer held impromptu check-ins in the hallway. He no longer made jokes. On Tuesday morning, Lexington's general counsel, along with the chief integrity officer, summoned 3 senior staff members to a secure meeting suite. Chadwick was one. Brent Ashby was another. The third was a senior financial controller whose name rarely appeared in public, but whose digital signature appeared on 7 flagged documents. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When it ended, security was asked to escort all 3 to separate offices for asset and communication containment. Word leaked quickly, not because anyone spoke, but because the firm's hierarchy could not hide absence. Chadwick's office door remained closed for the first time in 5 years. His nameplate was removed that evening. His executive badge was deactivated the next morning. Brent Ashby's inbox sent out auto-responses that read position status under review. Internal servers were placed under restricted access. By Wednesday, the panic reached the investment partners. The $2.8 billion acquisition of Wellswood Franklin Holdings, scheduled for announcement at the end of the quarter, was postponed without reason. Journalists noticed. A Bloomberg analyst published a query into delayed merger activity. Then, an anonymous tipster, later confirmed to be an internal junior counsel, submitted documentation to the SEC indicating possible misrepresentations in prior deal data. The agency did not respond publicly, but Lexington's leadership received a subpoena notice marked time-sensitive urgent. The acquisition deal collapsed that evening. The investor group backing the merger withdrew funding. Wellswood Franklin's valuation plummeted by 9% in 24 hours. Lexington Capital's senior board, in emergency session, froze discretionary bonuses, announced a third-party audit, and placed all executive decisions under provisional oversight. Shares fell 6 points overnight. The building, once arrogant with confidence, moved now with tension. No one smiled in the hallways. No one lingered in break rooms. No one greeted each other at the elevators. The company intranet, once filled with celebration announcements and corporate culture highlights, was stripped of all non-essential content. A single message replaced the main banner: commitment to integrity, review underway. Inside the annex, Everett Miles watched everything unfold without movement. He did not walk the halls. He did not enter offices. He did not respond to the 3 emails he received from HR asking for a debrief. He recorded each message, timestamped them, and archived them in his personal log. He documented every stage of the fallout. He titled his next entry, Stage 9 Consequence Delivered. He wrote, "Denial has a lifespan. Exposure forces transition. Silence now exists not as absence, but as panic. The system that erased me has now begun to erase itself." At 4:15 p.m. on Thursday, 2 plainclothes security staff entered the East Executive Wing. They did not speak to anyone. They walked directly to Chadwick Grazer's office. No announcement was made. No alert was issued. But Everett had already been told it was coming. A facility staff member, someone who had seen him working quietly in the annex for over a year, had whispered to him that morning, "They're taking him today." So Everett stood in the doorway of the annex, calm, quiet, unreadable, as Chadwick was escorted down the hallway. He carried no briefcase. He wore no jacket. His face was pale, his eyes forward, his mouth tight. He did not glance at Everett, but others did. Two analysts from strategy, both of whom had laughed at Everett during the mixer weeks ago, now stood still at their desks, watching Chadwick's departure with confusion and unease. They saw Everett. One of them lowered her gaze. The other turned away. The walk from Chadwick's office to the building exit took less than 2 minutes. The silence in the corridor made it feel longer. When he was gone, the atmosphere did not relax. It constricted. Everyone now understood that the man they had followed, laughed with, echoed, and mimicked had not simply been wrong. He had been caught, and the person they had ignored had become the one holding the line. Later that evening, Everett received another envelope. This one bore the Lexington seal. Inside was a letter from the office of the CEO. It began formally. "Mr. Miles, we acknowledge receipt of the evidence you submitted regarding strategic project misattribution and procedural discrepancies. In light of recent findings, we extend our formal appreciation for your documentation and cooperation." The winter air that settled over Lexington Capital's main building in the weeks following the acquisition collapse carried with it a stillness that did not belong to the season alone. After the resignation of 3 senior executives, after the announcement of a federal inquiry, after the shareholder forum dissolved into chaos and the board initiated a full restructuring of compliance oversight, the company began to speak in a new tone, one of correction, of humility, of restoration. Public statements acknowledged deep failures in leadership and attribution. Press releases carried words like transparency and truth. But those words, though spoken loudly, arrived only after they had already been forced into the room. Inside the annex, Everett Miles continued his work as he always had, not under title or directive, but under discipline and purpose. He declined the advisory role. He declined the reinstatement. He even declined the quiet bonus offered as part of an unofficial reconciliation effort. He understood these gestures for what they were, symbols meant to cleanse the hands of those who had looked away while he was buried beneath their laughter. He was not angry. He was resolute. The annex remained his chosen space, not because he belonged there, but because it reminded him of what had been required to see clearly. He arrived each morning with the same precision, documented new developments, watched as departments shifted their dynamics, and continued to write the final stages of his archive, now no longer a collection of humiliations, but a record of restoration. Then one morning, tucked into the stack of interoffice memos left on the annex shelf, he found a letter addressed by hand. No stamp, no return address, just a plain white envelope with his name written in block letters. Inside was a single-page letter, unlined, typed in careful sentences with no header, no signature beyond a name he had not spoken aloud in months. Chadwick Grazer. The words on the page did not ask for forgiveness. They did not plead innocence. They did not revise the past. They read as reflection, raw, clear, and unpolished. Chadwick wrote that in the beginning, he had believed power was earned by dominance, by removing competition, by shaping perception to match ambition. He wrote that merit had become a costume, something he dressed others in when it benefited him, but discarded when it became inconvenient. He wrote that Everett had been a mirror he avoided, a reflection of everything he could not steal, because Everett's strength had never come from visibility, but from endurance. Chadwick described the moment Everett entered the boardroom in silence, carrying only a folder and a name that had been erased, as the moment the architecture of his power cracked. He admitted that he had spent weeks trying to understand how someone with no allies, no access, and no voice had managed to dismantle a structure built over years. And in that reflection, he found not a threat, but a lesson. He wrote that he had accepted the board's formal decision and would not appeal it. He had taken a position with a nonprofit advisory council focused on ethical corporate governance. He now worked with startups and struggling firms to identify and eliminate the same patterns he had once perpetuated. He had not gone there to clean his image. He had gone because his image no longer mattered. He did not ask Everett to believe him. He did not ask for contact. He wrote only one promise: I will not rewrite the past. I will not run from it. I will carry it. Everett finished reading and held the letter in his hands for a long time. He did not feel vindicated. He did not feel moved. He felt aligned. The truth had not broken Chadwick. It had revealed him. The fall had not destroyed his voice. It had made room for it. That afternoon, Everett closed his notebook. The final page was written. Stage 10, the reckoning and the renewal ended with a single sentence. Justice lives longer than cruelty because it does not rely on fear to be remembered. He stood up, placed the notebook into the drawer beside his desk, and locked it. He did not look back at the digital files. He did not reread the entries. He did not revisit the images or the documentation. They were no longer for him. They were records for anyone who needed to know how to survive in a place built to erase them. He left the annex that evening not quietly but fully present. As he passed through the lobby, the receptionist nodded, not out of habit, out of respect. A junior associate from marketing held the door open without being asked. Everett walked through. No applause, no statement, just a path cleared by the weight of truth. Outside, the wind had picked up, the street lights blinking softly against the dark. He walked without destination, knowing that his journey no longer needed corridors or keycards to continue. His value had never been the titles they withheld or the spaces they denied. His value had been his refusal to let silence be mistaken for absence. And now, with the truth planted, grown, and made visible, he could walk forward not as a man looking for recognition, but as one who had created it on his own terms. Behind him, the building remained standing, but the system within it had changed. And one day, others would step into rooms once closed to them, carry names once forgotten, and know that they did not rise because they were allowed, but because someone refused to disappear the end. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching the journey unfold. If you found the story powerful, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you think and keeps these stories coming. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the plot twists? Which moment hit the hardest for you? And where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every one.